What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and today on the podcast is the one and only Reza Aslan, a return visit to homebrewed Christianity. And and here's why this is coming out today. Because his book, God, A Human History, comes out in paperback. It means it's cheaper. And it's a great book. We talk about that along with a host of other contemporary topics around religion and politics. And you even get the Reza Aslan endorsement of Mayor Pete Buttigieg. All right? That's going to happen. Haven, my 2-year-old, is over here, and he just brought in a truck and is making lots of noise. That's who you're hearing in the background. And why are you hearing him in the background? Well, I'm currently in charge as a father of all 3 of my children because my wife is finally free, of body attachments, namely our children, and is off for the week to Texas to hang out with one of our best friends. She's having fun, and I'm doing a podcast intro while the other 2 are at school. Haven apparently got up and wanted to join. Haven, do you have anything to say? Oh, excellent. Do you like Star Wars?
No.
Do you like your daddy?
Daddy.
Do you like Pebbles and Dino the dog?
Stop.
Do you think I'm like extremely handsome and intelligent?
Papa.
Paw Patrol. That's what Haven wants you all to know, Paw Patrol. Now, this episode has a sponsor. I want you to hear about it. It's an amazing trip I'm going on this summer in August to Chicago. It is a baseball and faith trip. It's run by Herb, who you're about to hear from, and Episcopal priest. So when you hear like faith and baseball trip, it's not like go and get saved. It's more progressive mainline Protestant types. A lot of ministers who are into baseball and their friends who want to watch 3 baseball games, have delicious food, pizza, beverages, beer tours, and stuff like that in Chicago with others. So you'll hear about that. I'm excited about it, and I'm going to be there. But you'll find all the info about the trip on the Homebrewed Christianity website. You can go to homebrewedchristianity.com or tripfuller.com, trip with 2 P's. You'll find out info. If you have questions, holler at me. But if you want to go watch some Cubs, some White Sox, some Brewers, and have a spectacular time, holla, 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 holla back. Now, here's our sponsor, and then me and Reza. Hello, everybody. This is Trip, and I'm with Herb, who's going to tell you about an amazing opportunity this summer. Because if you're down for baseball, delicious food, excellent drinks, and people that are as obsessed with baseball as you are, then you should come hang out with me this August in Chicago and Milwaukee. Right, Herb?
Amen.
Amen. That's what I'm talking about.
There you go.
Why don't you tell us just what is all involved in this baseball and faith trip?
Yeah, thank you. This is a really unique pilgrimage to some of baseball's most iconic ballparks and experiences. So it's a 5-day trip based out of Chicago. I guess to hit the basics, it includes a Cubs home game, a White Sox home game, and we make an away game appearance, if you will. We make a little road trip up to Milwaukee and get a Brewers home game. So 3 major league ballparks, and 3 teams, of course, 3 home games for these teams, all within a 5-day period.
Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about the trip is you literally don't have to plan anything.
That's right.
All the meals are all included in it, where you stay, transportation between everything. And here's what happened. Like, I got an email from y'all about, we'd like to tell the homebrewed people about this trip. And then I go look at it. Now, even though the Dodgers aren't involved, which is my baseball team, I got so pumped. We'll
work on that.
This trip exists? You get to go do this? Okay, so on top of the baseball stuff, like going on to Wrigley Field and all that kind of thing.
Yes.
When a bullet point of a trip includes the words progressive lunch through 3 neighborhood pizzerias,
my favorite day,
then I'm like everything except my diet got excited.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. So, we plan all of our adventures. We call them meaningful adventures. We plan all of our meaningful adventures to be turnkey experiences. So, if you kind of picture it like a cruise on land. So, from the moment you show up, everything is included. Every meal, all the transportation, every event. There's no additional costs, nothing else necessary for you on the trip. I will say that people tend to, we accumulate a few souvenirs. There are a few opportunities to add some adult beverages along the way. But other than that, it's an all-inclusive trip. Everyone stays in a hotel suite at the Hilton, Magnificent Mile. All transportation is by motor coach. All the meals, all the snacks, everything is included. So, yeah, and you get to stand on Wrigley Field. That's a good point. We do a private tour of Wrigley. We take one day's theme. We have a theme for each day, and one day's theme is neighborhoods and the meaning of culture in each neighborhood. And what better way to do that in Chicago than to tour every neighborhood's key pizzeria? So we have to incorporate, of course, the food right along the trip. So that is really an exciting day, and something that would otherwise be difficult to pull off on your own. So that's what we're after: a unique experience.
Well, I'm super pumped about it. It is this summer, August 6th through 11th, 2019. On top of all the baseball stuff, there's also like an immersion tour of beer in Milwaukee. You get to go to Buddy Guy's for some live blues music. Yeah. And so anyway, you check it out. All the info is going to be on the website. I'm going to send an email out this week with all the info around it. But when you see it, if you're the person to go on this trip, it makes perfect sense. And then we get to go on a beer tour, try pizza, watch baseball games and stuff together this summer.
Together. That's right. Looking forward to it.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. So what's the website if someone's driving right now?
The simplest website is www.pointabove.com. There is a tab there for adventures, and you can see different things that are being offered. But Faith in Baseball is central to that and is on the homepage. And of course, you can do your website as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for letting me know about this. And all the homebrew listeners, if you are a baseball person and want to hang out this summer, let me know because I'm looking forward to going. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Trip, and Reza Aslan is back on the podcast. After a 6-year hiatus or something, I've managed to luring him back on so that he can tell us about God. So, how does that feel?
Listen, by the way, that was the 6 years ago that I did the podcast with you guys. Was one of my favorite podcasts of all time.
Well,
one of my favorite interviews.
That's what I like to hear. Now I'm going to attempt to not ruin your return visit.
We'll see.
So maybe the place to start, I think, is to let everyone know that your book on God, but with a lowercase g and an emphasis on God's history in humanity, is coming out again in paperback. So for whoever didn't get it, they should go get it, right?
That's right. April 9th in the cheap form, paperback form. I find this whole thing so silly. Like, I can't believe that it's 2019 and we still do this whole thing where we publish a book in hardcover, force people to pay, twice the cost for it for 18 months. And then when we feel like, okay, they're done buying the hardcover, then we make the affordable. It just makes no sense to me. It's such a weird and outdated system. But what are you going to do?
Well, the publishing industry probably should think about a number of things at this point, but but I do think the book is timely, and it's raising the question of God in a way that could be uncomfortable for people that are committed to religious traditions, and uncomfortable to people that are joyfully unconnected to them. So when you say the word God,
this is a story of my life right there. That's like basically you just summed up my career.
I know you can pick up trolls from every religion and all the new atheists.
And all the new atheists. Yeah, it's weird. But
So when you start a book on God, where was it that you first had the big God question land, and it demanded a philosophical, a scientific, a cross-cultural answer, and not just your own experience in a particular tradition?
Well, it's strange because I wanted to write this book for a really, really long time. And in many ways, this book is the culmination of my studies as an academic, my search and journey as a person of faith, and my work as a writer and commentator on religion and religious history. And so the way that I pitched this book to my publisher was that I was going to write basically this kind of sprawling, epic, brief history of religions, if you will. And that I was going to go back all the way to the beginning, because there are a lot of books, about the quote unquote history of God, but more often than not, what they mean is the history of the sort of Abrahamic conception of God. If you're someone like Karen Armstrong, at least she goes back to like the axial age, but what I wanted to do was start the history of God, all the way back to the beginning. In fact, back before Homo sapiens, and really kind of talk about how the concept of God arose in human evolution, and how that concept really played a profound role in the development of human beings, human communities, human societies. That they kind of went hand in hand. That it's not so much that our idea of God shifted as human evolution progressed, but that idea of God came first in a way and actually propelled much of human evolution. And so honestly, I get about 3 chapters into this book, and I suddenly realize just what a gigantic bite I've taken, and really kind of recognize I can't really do what I had planned on doing, because this thing is going to be 3,000 pages long if I keep doing it like this. But the other thing that was really fascinating is, and the original version of this book didn't really have a thesis. It was just sort of, I'm just going to lay everything out there and sort of slowly track the development of our ideas of God over, hundreds of thousands of years. But something about the sort of prehistoric stuff that I was doing, and really immersing myself in subjects that were new to me, cognitive theory and evolutionary theory, the cognitive science of religion. And as I began to do that work, it's almost like a motif. A refrain. It just kept coming up over and over and over and over again. And it was this unconscious, involuntary, and yet unavoidable quirk in the human mind that compels us, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we like it or not, whether we even believe in God or not, compels us to humanize the divine, to implant in God our own emotions and personalities, our own attributes. And it can be traced all the way back to the very beginning. And so when that sort of 100-pound weight suddenly dropped, I realized, oh, this is no longer a book about the history of God. This is a book about the history of this one particular way in which all people in all parts of the world, regardless of what religion they come from, regardless of what background they have, regardless, as I said, of whether they even believe in God or not, it's this one way that we all think about God. And so that became suddenly the focus of it.
And so when you look at the history, tell us about the birth of God, right? Like whether or not there is some transcendent or ultimate reality or the divine or whatnot, whether it corresponds to anything. One of the fascinating things about your book is that for believers and non-believers alike, there is a history to God. There is a birth of God in the story of Sapiens.
Yeah. And the thing about it is that I say this, like, I think from the very start of the book, that this is not a book about, whether God exists or not, because I'm not interested in that question. I mean, I truly do believe that faith is a choice. I believe that faith is an emotion. And like any emotion, it's not about reason. It's not about intellect. It's about experience. It's about who you are. And there's nothing I can say or do that's going to make a believer no longer believe, or a non-believer suddenly believe. And I have no interest in that at all. I myself believe in God. I myself am a person of faith. What I'm much more interested in is what I think is a more difficult question, which is, what do you even mean by the word God? Mm-hmm. It's so funny to me that this one word, which of every single word, in our language, is the most variable word, is also the one that we all just assume we all think the same thing. We all believe in the same way. Just the very question, do you believe in God, is so absurd, because it's like, you're assuming that what you call God is what I call God. And so I can't answer that question until first you tell me what you mean by God. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't interested in that. But as you rightly say, yeah, look, there is a genesis to this idea, and a history to it, to its development. Now, there are two ways to think about this: is that, well, it's just a thing that human beings came up with, and so it's not real, or it is real, and what this book really is not the history of an invention, but the history of a discovery, if you will. Mm-hmm. And as I always do with all of my books and all of my work, I just let you make that decision. I'm not interested in making that kind of decision for you. But I will say this: the problem at the heart of this sort of search for God is this. In every culture in the world, in every culture that has ever arisen, in every part of the globe, throughout all of time, and indeed even predating our existence as Homo sapiens, mm-hmm. there has been a universal belief in the soul, a universal belief in the soul as separate from the body. That belief can be traced to Neanderthals with an enormous amount of confidence. That belief can be traced to Cro-Magnon with far less confidence, but nevertheless, there's evidence that we can talk about. And the problem for evolutionary theorists and evolutionary biologists is that despite hundreds of years of trying to figure out why, what is the source of this confounding belief that we are eternal souls in material bodies? What is the source of that? Like, what could possibly be the evolutionary advantage of such a belief? Because if it exists before we existed, then there must be an evolutionary reason for it. We've been asking that question for 200 years, and as I outlined in the book, we don't know. The answer is we don't know. We literally have no idea. Mm-hmm. I talk about how the best guess that we have now, and it's a guess, the best guess that we can put forth to explain this belief, the belief in the soul, or what I just kind of refer to as the religious impulse, is that it's an accident, that it's some, byproduct of some other evolutionary adaptive advantage. It's like an echo, right? That very early in our evolution, we developed the cognitive processes necessary for some other function to help us survive. And the echo of that ability is this universal belief in the soul. That's a pretty good answer. There's no proving it or disproving it. An equally good answer is that because there's a soul. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, again, I don't know. I have no idea.
And I think the way that plays out in different parts of the academy is revealing, because Some will, want to find an adaptive advantage. So you start with hyperactive agency detection device where, the rustling, I dodged the Bengal tiger, I survived. So I'm always running around looking for agency or that type of thing. Or it's how we survived the freeloader problem when the agricultural evolution, and there's something in the desire to explain the origins of religion that is either feared or embraced by people. And I think the assumption is that if you explain something using a scientific discourse, you're explaining the phenomena away. And one of the things I love about this book, and have given it to friends that are both anti-religious and ones that can't see the beauty and the tradition they hold so dear, is that if there's anything ultimate, it should not get pinned down, and it definitely shouldn't get explained away because we figured out how to use a theory well. Because we don't even allow that for our most deep relationships. Like, you could sit here and explain everything about how you fell in love with your partner, how you had twins, how you did your what was the story you told last time about you had an engagement party, said surprise, we're getting you could tell that whole thing, and I could hear it as a beautiful love story, but you aren't worried that I'm going to fall in love with your wife, right? Because there's this ultimate mystery, there's this particularity to it, but it's not a denial of it, that the truth of it isn't transferable. And to me, that was one of the powerful things about the book, is it goes look at these histories. They're so anthropomorphic, and yet there's something so deep in it. And so often we look at religions and go, oh, well, that's just anthropomorphism. Or you get all woo-woo, and you're like, oh, it's just deep in mystery. I got nothing to say.
Well, that's so well said. And I think part of the issue is that we're trapped in these weird dichotomies that we create for ourselves between spiritual and secular, between sacred and profane, between science and religion. And what we don't recognize is the blurred lines, between these different categories. What you said is absolutely right. Look, and I acknowledge and admit this in the book freely, and I think it's something that people of faith need to acknowledge more, which is that whatever you call your faith, whatever you call your religious experience, your sense of transcendence or the divine, however you want to term it, whatever it is a neurological phenomenon. It is the result of chemical reactions in your brain. That is a fact. Now, here's the problem. So what? So what? I mean, that's not all that interesting or a unique observation, since literally every experience without exception is the result of chemical reactions in your brain, including this conversation. My recognition of your existence is nothing but chemical reactions in my brain. I can't prove that you exist. It's just, neurons firing. That's all it is. So the fact that that's true for every experience, as well as the faith experience, says really nothing about the faith experience. It certainly doesn't delegitimize the faith experience. But I think what happens is that people who, are materialist or who are purely scientific in their outlook, or have sort of no interest in spirituality or spiritual experiences or explanations, will look at that and say, as you rightly said, well, that explains it away. Now that I know where the experience resides in the brain, then it's not a real experience anymore. And that, to me, is an absurd statement for a scientist to make, but it's also an absurd statement for a person of faith to make. I think a person of faith can sometimes feel threatened when told what you're experiencing is a neurological phenomenon, because they think, oh, well, you're dismissing it, then you're saying it's not a real thing. But of course it's a real thing, because the only thing that's real, the only reality, is what's happening in your brain period. So I think for me, it's important to just let the reader, let the viewer decide for him or herself, which side of this fence they're gonna fall on. But I also at the same time make no secret of where I fall.
Right. And I'm interested in how you would introduce those early patterns of religious exploration, like the emergence of language and rituals, tribal identity, the emergence of the symbolic and such. When you're talking to people who haven't invested in the academic study of religion or philosophy of religion and such, what is it like to hand them myths, rituals, language in a deep sense and not a trivial one?
Yeah, so what you're talking about, of course, is the most fundamental debate in the study of religion, which is which came first, myth or ritual, right? Whatever religion is, and of course there are a million definitions from it, what religion contains are those things. Myths, which is the stories, the scripture, the sort of ideas that are expressed through language, symbols, metaphors, and then rituals, the practices that allow you to actually put those things into play. The fundamental divide in religion is over which came first. And what that basically means is that one either thinks that myth came first, so whatever the impulse was, we looked to the world, or we looked to ourselves, or we looked inward, or whatever the case may be, and we created these stories, these ways of explaining the nature of the universe and our role in it. We created stories about the heavens and the earth and gods and goddesses, ways to kind of I want to make it clear. I'm not sort of diminishing the truth of myth by saying ways of explaining. I think a better way of putting it is a mode of knowing, right? Not a way of explaining, but a mode of knowing. And then when those ideas, were circulating, it was important to take part in those myths. So those myths became what are sometimes referred to as a script in a performance, right? So now we have to perform those myths, and that's where ritual comes. That's one explanation of it. The flip side of that, of course, is that no, ritual came first. There were no myths. We were just people, living in societies, doing things because of their utility. And if you do something enough times, no matter why you started doing it, eventually those things become ritualized. And then you need to explain why you do the things that you do. And so you create myths that then become explanations for the rituals you already take part in. Again, who knows which came first? Nobody knows. It's probably far more fluid than either position. But I think that where you fall in that debate has a lot to do with how you think about how you approach religion. For me, again, I think if you read the book, it's pretty, although I don't sort of come right out and say it, it's pretty clear that I definitely fall into the myth category, that I really do believe that certain cognitive experiences that we had very, very early in our human development gave us an impulse to think about our experience of the world in transcendent terms. Mm-hmm. And then as we began to sort of spread that information, spread those ideas, we did so in the only way that we knew how to do it, in the way that we do so today, which is through storytelling, through symbols, and through metaphors. And then eventually those stories, symbols, and metaphors became accepted in a communal setting that then fostered participation in those stories and those myths. And that's what I would say. And then we're talking about many, many millennia later before you have anything that could properly be termed religion. Right. I mean, we're hundreds of thousands of years from using that word yet.
Well, yeah, and before you even get to something that, after you get to something that could be identified as a religion, the centrality and importance of beliefs comes significantly later than that.
Exactly.
And so
ideas of doctrine or theology and this sort.
In one of the things that that you point out in the book, something that is kind of the unstated assumption in the Believer Show is that we should be asking ourselves what we're cutting ourselves off from if we don't learn like some deep form of religious literacy. That if what is our inheritance of value, of meaning, of purpose, of insight, of wisdom, that we have preserved, encountered, wrestled with, been shaped by, that if we don't engage in the myths and in the rituals and in the traditions, we're losing access to. How do you, maybe you could introduce that idea to someone who is a new atheist believer and a devout Christian believer, that if they want to take seriously, there's something to be gained?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think part of the problem comes from a misunderstanding of religion as being primarily about beliefs and practices. That religion is about scripture and authority and institutions and theology and doctrine and do's and don'ts and ceremonies and ritual practice. Now, those things obviously are involved in religion, and certainly beliefs and practices are integral to it. But that's not what people mean when they refer to themselves with a religion. When someone says, I am a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu, they are not making a faith statement. They're making an identity statement. And I think that that's what both the devout believer and the devout atheist seem to misunderstand. They're actually coming from it from a very similar point of view. The devout atheist thinks that all believers are fundamentally automatons who, you plug in a piece of scripture into their head and then they robotically follow that scripture. And so they think that they can sort of destroy religion and religious arguments simply by flipping through any random scripture and finding bits of savagery or bits of conflict or contradiction, and then say, well, then that's that, as though, again, that the scripture is just a code that you punch into a believer. That's not true at all. And at the same time, the believer, especially the devout believer, believes that, there are these things called religion that other people believe in. But what I believe in isn't religion. What I believe in is just truth. It's just fact, So you can't even use the term religion to discuss, the things that I believe. The truth of the matter is that religion, all religions in all parts of the world, is first and foremost a matter of identity. When you call yourself by a religion, you are talking about how you see the world, how you understand your place in it. And as a matter of identity, of course, it encompasses all the other aspects of your identity, your nationality, your ethnicity, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your politics, your socioeconomic position. All of those things are wrapped up in the phrase, I am Christian. And this, by the way, I've got lots of data on this idea. I mean, I know it sounds kind of like more of a philosophical, way of thinking, but no, there's actually an enormous amount of data for it. I'll give you a perfect example of this. Look at the Pew Forum on Religion in Public Life. So every year they tell you how many people are Christian in this country. This year there was a lot of consternation because the number of the percentage of Americans who call themselves Christian dropped. It dropped to 71%. So 71%, 7 out of 10 Americans, Trip. 7 out of 10 Americans tell pollsters they are Christian. Really? Really? I mean, what kind of utter nonsense is that? 7 out of 10 Americans go to church on a regular basis. 7 out of 10 Americans read the Bible. 7 out of 10 Americans can tell you anything about Jesus except that he was born in a manger and died on a cross because one's Christmas and the other is Easter. Of course not. Of course not. 7 out of 10 Americans are not Bible-believing, Jesus-following Christians. They say they are Christian because they're stating their identity, not their belief. They're telling you who they are, not what they believe. And in fact, I would say for a large number of that 71%, saying I am Christian is akin to saying I'm American, or increasingly, I'm white. Those things just mean the same thing to them. By the way, I just want to say the flip side of this is also true. There have been numerous polls taken on the beliefs of atheists. The last poll that I just saw showed that about 11% of self-described atheists believe in God. So again, it's just an identity. It's a statement, right? And so if that's true, and I'm pretty sure it's true, then none of us can afford to ignore religion anymore. It would be like ignoring nationality or ethnicity or race. It's a fundamental part of our identity as human beings. It plays a massive role in our global politics, in our social cues, in the development of our society. To pretend that religion is unimportant and therefore unworthy of study is to dig a hole in the ground and stick your head in it.
Well, so you're not saying 7 out of 10 Americans pray for their enemies?
That's a good one. That's a really good one. What I can tell you is that 7 out of 10 white evangelical Christians believe that we should shut our borders to all refugees without exception. So you try to reconcile that with 7 out of 10 Americans who say, that they're followers of Jesus Christ.
All the refugees except 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians are allowed in each year, just on principle. So when you think of I know you quoted the Buddha and how a religious tradition is like a deep well, and it would be dumb to have a bunch of shallow ones. And you think of like a Meister Eckhart who said, God is the great underground river no one can dam up. And so the question is whether you're hydrated, not where the living water came from.
By the way, that's why I think your what we were talking about language before is so important. And I had said before that, it's so funny that we are in a field without definition, right? The study of religion has no accepted definition. And so everyone is just kind of forced to define it for themselves before they begin studying it. Why I think there's so much value in defining it in terms of language is because it makes sense to say to someone, you are speaking a different language, but you're saying the same thing that I'm saying. And if you could understand that when it comes to the difference between French and German, then you can understand that when it comes to the difference between Islam and Christianity.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things I think, or why I am invested in helping Christians, especially in America, with the power that they have access to and the demands that are before us as a species, if we want to survive and thrive and move towards a more just relation, is that almost all the religious traditions, but the one I was born into, if you just take it more seriously and turn its narratives and rituals against yourself, you actually have a way of being in the world that is deeply human, deeply connected, and is beautiful, right? Like, and one of the challenges you talk about in the book is how religions are born in this anthropomorphic dynamism, and yet what it ends up projecting and producing, the best of it can then be turned back on us to critique us and call more beauty out. And I wonder how you see the peril when of being a culture as diverse with as much multiplicity as America, when we don't have the shared narratives to call things out of us. Be it like, just think, like, we couldn't have Martin Luther King again, who takes the narrative of America with a certain critical yet naivete to it, and the prophetic church tradition as interpreted through the Black religious experience in America. That would be too siloed at this point. So, like, when you think of what religion gives us and the multiplicity and pluralism of today, I see that as a conundrum, and I wonder what the prophet or what the poet sounds like that calls us back to that critical turn in the tradition.
Yeah, it's hard. I'm in the not the most optimistic mind frame, and haven't been for some time now. 801 days, I guess. Is that how long it's been?
Feels longer.
Yeah, and I think when I try to think about what I can be optimistic about, I look at the fact that so many problems when it comes to bigotry and racism in America, and particularly those two terms in a religious context, have been brushed under the rug for so many generations. And it's now, I think, extraordinarily difficult to honestly ignore those massive societal problems. When Jerry Falwell Jr. Stands in front of thousands of his students and says, "I've got a gun in my pocket," and any of those Muslims try to come after me, I know how to use it. And we look at that and we say, okay, so that right there is literally the face of conservative white evangelical Christianity, and it's completely accepted. That's what that face would say now. I think that at the best, we're in a place where we have to confront that problem in America, right? And I've been waiting for some time now for the religious left to rise up, and it hasn't happened. I want to feel optimistic and think that it may happen in this next election. I don't want to get political here, but I've kind of been sort of trying to figure out who I'm going to support and what I'm going to do in order to fight what I think is not just an existential threat to our country, but a clear and present evil, a true evil that has gripped this country in the form of the orange clown who is president. And I think to myself, who can be the sort of symbol of that religious left, right? Who can actually activate them on the other side? And there's really only one person, I think, that can do it. And I know it sounds insane, but for me, it's about Pete Buttigieg, who a month ago was and also ran. And I think in the past month, because he has turned people like me onto him, people who are only interested in defeating, this sort of great evil force. By the way, I'm not using the term evil lightly here. This is a man who 2 days ago, in a mocking voice, mocked starving women and children refugees by saying, "Oh, I'm so threatened. If I go back, they're going to kill me. Oh, it's all bull, you guys. It's a fat con job." That's that's evil. That's pure personified evil. And, you know, for me, the only thing that matters is removing that stain from office. And so for a while, I kept thinking to myself, okay, who's best? Like, who can actually get this guy out of office? Which is the mistake that I made in 2016, by the way, is just thinking who can defeat this guy. And now I just think, who can activate the force that you are talking about? And holy moly, maybe it is a gay, small town mayor from Indiana who can stand up and say, from a place of profound devout belief as a Christian, that, Mike Pence has no business talking about morality if you're going to be the spokesman for the porn star presidency. Mm-hmm. That until the religious left rises up, and says to Franklin Graham, you don't represent Christianity, you're the opposite of what Jesus preached, then, maybe we'll change administrations, maybe, but we're not going to change this country. I do think that, unfortunately, because of the way that it works around here, it needs a leader. It's not just going to be a ground up moving. Those people are out there. Those religious liberals and progressives of all faiths are out there. It's just they need something to rally around. And I look at the field of Democratic candidates, and there's only one candidate who's even willing to talk about faith, let alone saying with boldness, I'm gonna grab those people. I'm gonna get them activated. If it can happen, who knows? But I do think that we're in a do or die situation in this country, and so it's best to try.
In one of the things about Pete's, it's in his biography, along with I've seen him interviewed 5 or 6 times. Is he can describe how his particular religious convictions shape what he does, and affirm a larger story that other people with different convictions share in. And I think that is something that progressive people haven't figured out how to do, how to celebrate the story that animates them while also celebrating someone else who uses different language and symbols and myths and rituals.
Yeah. And I think part of that has to do with, what we were saying before, which is that, if you think about your religion in terms of language, it can be as meaningful and as deep and as true for you as it is for someone speaking a different language, right? And my goal in life has always been to be that translator, to go around and sort of tell people, yeah, I know that sounds weird, but let me explain what he's saying, because it's not that weird, and it's actually kind of recognizable, to what. And I think until people, more and more people sort of understand that, yeah, you're right, there's going to be this block to really reaching out to people of other faith in more than just tolerance, right? It's more than just being like, okay, I'm right, you're wrong, but I tolerate your wrongness, and more of sort of, and not even acceptance, but common cause, to be able to say that we're all in this together, that we're all facing a similar threat.
Yeah. So, what do you make of the increased attention, and also just the raising of cultural anxiety leading to progressives trying to out-progressive each other, come up with sweet takedowns, cultivating outrage and things, because it seems to me one of the insights of all the religious traditions is how you can simultaneously cultivate critical reflection on systems that are broken and violence occurring, and cultivate non-anxious presence in the midst of it that doesn't require creating a totality in the other as the enemy, and yet so much of progressive culture and things has turned into an anxiety pit that I'm not sure is helping. And I definitely know my Trump family members enjoy watching it.
Well, I think part of it has to do with the inevitable problems of having religion and politics confront each other. I mean, I think we often talk about the way in which religion can corrupt politics. And in some ways that's true. I mean, politics is at least theoretically supposed to be about compromise, and religion theoretically is about absolutes. And so when those things come in contact with each other, it's clear why compromise can give way to absolutism. But I think the flip side is equally true, because politics is about sowing fear and anxiety and distrust. That's always been the most powerful means of rallying people to your cause. And I think, for religion, that sense of feeling under siege, feeling as though, your very sense of self, your very identity is being attacked, is an enormously appealing sentiment in the political realm, right? And so, I do recognize that. I do, however, want to say something that I think is very important, because we need to, as much as possible, avoid the temptation of both sidesism. Mm-hmm. We had 8 years in which the right was claiming that, providing temporary legal status to children of illegal immigrants is the destruction of the Constitution. And now we have literally an administration whose every decision is about the destruction, the foundations of the Constitution, who attacks federal judges because of their race, who has repeatedly violated his oath to protect the freedom of speech and the freedom of press by calling for the jailing of reporters who were reporting on the Mueller investigation. And for the left now to be screaming and yelling about the destruction of the Constitution, I just think it's the height of absurdity to say, oh, see, now you're just doing the same thing that the right did. There is no both sidesism here. One side is acting in utter bad faith. There is nothing redeemable about that argument at all. So, I do believe that there is a legitimate place for anxiety right now. I do believe that we are, on a precipice. I personally don't think that we're ever going to go back. I think that the stain of the Trump presidency, the bald-faced racism, the attempt to remove constitutional rights from certain sectors of American society, the attempt to just simply just lie, to just pretend that reality doesn't matter, to openly and brazenly lie, and to be rewarded for it. I don't see how we ever go back from that. I don't see how any president, regardless of who that president is, takes us back from that precedent. The question is, can we stop it from going any further? And that, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it's an existential question. Can I make it personal for a minute?
Yeah.
This is the thing about Americans that kind of drives me insane. Actually, a lot of things about Americans drive me insane, like mayonnaise. What is the deal with mayonnaise?
I don't know.
Okay. I think Americans have this idea that, because, it's ingrained in our minds that, we are a special country, that we're different, that we're extraordinary, we're exceptional, that this country was founded under divine providence, none of which is true, remotely true. Because of that view, we think that somehow the American experiment is permanent. That, well, Jesus lasted 250 years. That's pretty much forever, right? No immigrant to this country believes that. I come from a country that's 2,500 years, so 10 times older than the United States is. And my country changed overnight. One night, it was a completely different country. I woke up, I went to sleep, I woke up, and it was a radically different country the next day. That happens everywhere. Turkey is a much older country than the United States. 10 years ago, Turkey was the most thriving democracy in the entire Middle East. Today, it is a bastion of authoritarianism and corruption, like that. So I think there is this idea, and you hear this very much amongst, intellectuals and amongst the media on both sides of the aisle, that this is a temporary blip, that the checks and balances, the system will win, right? The system will win. And, you need to talk to some immigrants because none of us believe that the system is permanent, that the system will win. Every one of us understands how a series of decisions without consequence ultimately leads to a place of no return. We're not in the place of no return yet, but it's around the corner. Give us one real national emergency. One real emergency. We haven't had one under this administration. Give us one 9/11 style emergency under this administration, and that's all she wrote.
Yeah. No, one of my friends that's in a mom said Donald Trump has encouraged the highest cooperation rate, see something, tell something, because every Muslim in America knows they do not want a terrorist at an event while he's president. And this is something you said, I don't remember where, but I remember seeing you say it, that if you think the tension that exists today that we're not handling well already is an issue, now imagine that the country is a majority minority country and is more diverse, and we're still trying to hold together these 50 different states and then the areas that don't get real political influence, but we kind of dominate them too. When you think of can you describe that big picture and what you think a positive role all the kind of religious leaders that are listening can begin to make to set that before us as a real challenge, something to address?
Well, you said it yourself. We are, I guess, demographers are giving us about 2 decades before we are majority minority, and I understand why that creates an enormous amount of anxiety among white people in this country who have been used to a particular position of privilege. And I totally recognize why that anxiety has been so beautifully co-opted, not just by Trump, but by the entire GOP, in order to, as Lindsey Graham put it, activate angry white guys in order to change the politics of this country. I think that we didn't take it seriously enough before with Donald Trump and didn't see it coming. I don't think anyone is unaware of it now. I mean, we are very much aware of the racial tension that has been created as a result of just fundamental demographics. It is not a coincidence that the primary goal of the Trump administration is to cut immigration, not illegal immigration, legal immigration. That's actually their top agenda, is to stop the changing colors of this country. But it's a losing game. There's no stopping it. The demographics are already set. This is what is happening. And so perhaps, if you took a rosy view of situation, then you see this as kind of the last gasp of that, of the old sort of racial and political landscape in this country, and that what's coming is going to be radically different. I hope so. But I do feel that for religious leaders in particular, refusing to address this issue is a grave sin. To not be willing to stand in front of your congregation and talk about racism is, I think, the height of irresponsibility at this point. If you're a shepherd and your job is to shepherd your flock, right now the greatest threat to that flock is the scourge of racism, and whether your flock is going to be a target of racism or whether your flock is the source of that racism. If you're not willing to address it, then you're not willing to talk about what is unquestionably the biggest issue in our society right now.
Yeah.
Again, 81% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. That's a record. That's more evangelicals than voted for George Bush, who was a white evangelical. 81% of white evangelicals voted for a man who couldn't name a verse in the Bible if his life depended on it, and who is the living, breathing incarnation of every woe that Jesus talked about. 67% of evangelicals of color voted for Hillary Clinton. These are people who share the same theology, who in many ways share the same worldview, but who have a different skin pigmentation. If we're going to continue to pretend that this is not about race, then we're doing a disservice to our flocks and to the country itself. It's time to talk about race in church.
Yeah. Well, I've one last question for you, and this one came from a number of people that are regular listeners and interact on the Facebook groups. They wanted to know what kind of advice you would give for devout practitioners of a religious tradition who have multi-faith families. What are the gifts a multi-faith family can give children, and what does encouraging children in that space look like?
Yeah, this is a very personal question. We have a multi-faith family, as many people know. My wife is a Christian. I'm Muslim. I have one son who is very, very serious about his Judaism. It's actually quite hilarious. It was just Purim not too long ago, and he had this whole Purim thing and this Purim exhibit, that he was showing everybody. Of course, Purim is all about a demonic Persian king. I didn't mention that part to him. I was like, oh no, it's about this heroic Jewish queen who saves the Jews. And he's like, saves them from what? I was like, never mind. And then I have, one son who I've talked a lot about before, who is extraordinarily interested in Hinduism and is kind of obsessed with the Ramayana, which is understandable. It's about a blue god with a magic bow and arrow who hunts demons. I mean, that's the greatest children's book of all time. It's just not a children's book. But for us, what we always say is that the most important thing is that we all share the same values. We have different words for those values. We have different sources, different myths, different metaphors, different ways of talking about those values, but the values are identical. And so what we do is, instead of talking about the differences or for that matter, talking about the similarities, instead, we just put the values into practice. We just go and do those things. And we note oh, look, here's a Jewish community that's doing something that we just did with the Christian community, and so the fact that we're all doing the same thing, that we're on the same side, that we're all working together to put our values into practice for kids especially is a far more salient example of the bonds and the connections that we have beyond just our religions than anything that I could say to them, anything that I could teach them. Yeah, they know about the Buddha, they know, about Vishnu, and they know about, Moses, they know about Jesus and Muhammad. They know these things, they know these stories. And there have been some really interesting times, I got to be honest with you, in which, one or another son in the middle of hearing something will be like, wait, didn't you tell us this story already? And we're like, no, that was the Buddha. And so they themselves recognize, like, wait, that sounds familiar. It seems like I've heard that myth before. But again, for us, and I think that this is the advice that we always give, that's sort of the quick advice that we always give to other people who are in interfaith or multi-faith relationships, is just put it in practice. Just put it into the world. And that will create connections in a way that debating and arguing and talking just never does. Mm-hmm. I'm not about interfaith dialogue. I'm about interfaith action.
Well, I think that's great, and I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out on the.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's been too long.
Well, we'll do it sooner than in less than 5 years.
Yes, absolutely. It was great talking to you.
Awesome.